So, you can have auteurs outside of film. This is a motion pictures class, which means it covers things outside of film, including television, video games, and web content. And so, one of the few times in this semester where I get to talk about those other mediums is this class. So, television auteurs tend not to actually be directors, but to be producers and showrunners. Directors are contract workers in television. They're brought on for a single episode or maybe two or three episodes, and then they go on to another project. Generally, for directors, television work is something they do when they need a filler between films. So you don't see very many directors who are on set for the long durée that television requires. So instead, you see people like producers and showrunners who are there from the beginning to the end of a television's run. If a showrunner or producer changes up in the middle of a television series, that means bad things are happening because now you are losing that continuity of ownership of authorship for that television show, and can be really problematic to the production of the show. Very, very rarely does a show survive the switchover of a producer or showrunner. Um, so, some notable showrunners include Shonda Rhimes, Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder. There's a couple other ones out there I think I'm forgetting. Aaron Sorkin, West Wing, The Newsroom. He tends towards the political side of things, and he tends to be very melodramatic. Um, Dick Wolf, Law and Order franchise. All of the Law and Orders are Dick Wolf. Joss Whedon, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Dollhouse, Firefly. You'll notice he's got a genre that he likes. It's that sci-fi fantasy land, and he doesn't really stray from it very often. And of course, we have Tyler Perry. Again, tends towards the comedy, the dramedies, and again, looking at racial issues, right? Um, Better or Worse, House of Pain, Meet the Browns, as well as all of the Medea films, right? So, television auteurs, we also have video game auteurs. These tend to be lead game developer or artistic director. And they have a sense of style, especially if they're artistic directors. That means that they're focusing on the visuals of the game. If they are a game developer, they're generally focusing on the mechanics of the game. So for video games, the authorship can be in two different areas. They can be on the visual style of the game, and it can also be on how the game functions as something playable, the game mechanics. So we have Kojima, Metal Gear, Inabu, God's Hand, and Okami, Schaefer, Full Throttle series, Sid Meier, Civilization series, Miyamoto, all of the Mario Brothers. Now, you'll notice that most of our individual video game auteurs happen to be Japanese because the Japanese have that kind of artistic style is developed in their video game industry, and they sort of invest in that mythology of a single visionary. However, on the US side of things, we tend to see the company as the auteur because of the collaborative nature of video game production. And so it actually harkens back a lot to the early studio system where they sold films by the studio name first, then the stars, then the genre, and plotline. In video games, we see that a lot as well, where we're selling by the production company, BioWare, Blizzard, and Epic, and then by the director or the artistic talent, then by the game itself, the main plotline. So that, again, different parts of the world have different viewpoints on authorship, especially in video game production. And finally, we have our web auteurs. These people tend to be hyphenates. the director, writer, actor, producer. Part of this has to do with the fact that web content is generally content created because of the love of the thing, one, and two, as a method of alternative production. These generally tend to be people who couldn't get into traditional entertainment industries, so they carved out a niche of their own out of the web. People like Randall Munroe, who did XKCD, still does actually, which is a webcomic. Jerry Hawkins and Mike Krahulik did Penny Arcade. Penny Arcade started off as a webcomic. They began to do game production, and now they have two conventions, actually, two expos that are just them, right? The idea that a webcomic now has two different conventions, East and West Coast, is pretty amazing. Andrew Hussey did Homestuck, was a really big hit, and then came back for a revival. And of course, we have the quintessential web auteur, Felicia Day, who started off with The Guild, one of the very first successful web series, which then became a spin-off, Geek and Sundry, and Dragon Age. She also has a very successful career as a television and film actress. Again, web auteurs tend to be hyphenates. They're doing multiple jobs. They're directing, they're writing, they're acting, they're producing, mostly because they can't afford to hire people to do all those different jobs, so they're doing it themselves, and are carving out a niche for themselves in the entertainment industry and the place that has the most give, and that's usually online. Okay, I'm done, guys. See you next week.